So now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our very special guest speaker. As you know, IHG is privileged to operate more than 8,400 rooms amongst 4 brands: the Holiday Inn Express, Holiday Inn, Staybridge, and Candlewood Suites, on 21 Army posts throughout this country. And we call it the IHG Army Hotels. Our speaker this morning is directly responsible for these posts and thousands of other soldiers, which means as he's an owner, our customer, just like you, he's also a decorated member of the U.S. Army, and he knows an awful lot about training, engagement, and leadership. And one of the things we've talked about this week, he knows that good enough is never just it. We always know we have to strive to be better. He's passionate about taking care of the soldiers and their families. And we are delighted to have him here today to speak with you, owner to owner. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Commanding General, U.S. Army Installation Management Command, Lieutenant General Rick Lynch. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, Kirk, I appreciate that introduction and the opportunity to be here. Thank you very much. For all of you, thank you for what you do. I am going to talk about a point that I believe is something that we should all acknowledge, is the business that we're all in is the business of touching lives and making a difference. That's the business that we're in. You know, I'm a music aficionado. I like all kinds of music, both kinds. I like country and Western, both country and Western. and there's a song out now about fishing. It's a dad and his daughter, and they're fishing. And the theme of the song is that the daughter thinks that they're just fishing, but they're not. They're making memories. They're touching lives. They're making a difference. And I want to make sure that nobody in this audience, candidly IHG worldwide, thinks that you're just fishing, because they're touching lives and they're making a difference. When I introduce myself, I don't introduce myself as the Commanding General of the United States Army Installation Management Command with the call sign Defender 6. Before that, I commanded 3 Corps in Fort Hood with the call sign of Phantom 6. Before that, the 3rd Division in Fort Stewart with the call sign of Marne 6. When I introduce myself as Sarah's husband and the father of Susan and Lucas, and my wife Sarah and my daughter Susan and her fiance David are in the audience. And I don't accept any applause from anybody. When they want to recognize me as a soldier, I accept the applause for all soldiers, 1.1 million soldiers. But candidly, the people we ought to be recognizing is our military families, and I'll talk about that in detail. So please, let's recognize our families. Touching lives, making a difference. So there I was in 1972, born and raised in Hamilton, Ohio. My parents both worked at the paper mill, both worked shift work. We really had no money. I walked into my guidance counselor as a junior in high school. Her name was Eileen Lowell. Talk about touching lives. And I said, ma'am, my parents have no money, but I believe I'd like to go to college. Where can you go to college if you have no money? And she said, well, they got these things called military academies. I said, well, how much do they cost? And she said, nothing. They pay you to go. Sounded pretty good to me. I applied to West Point in Annapolis. I got my West Point acceptance on a Monday, my Annapolis acceptance the very next day. The only reason I went to West Point is because I got the acceptance the day before. The postman truly determined my fate. I went home and I saw my dad. I said, hey, Dad, I'm going to West Point. He said, boy, what do you want to do that for? That's the Army. My dad was a private E1 in 1945 when he was drafted in the Army. He was a private E1 in 1947 when he was kicked out of the Army. He was the world's worst soldier, and he's very proud of that fact. If you go to the local VFW hall now in Hamilton, Ohio, the old guy in the last bar stool on the left wearing a ball cap with 3 stars, that's my dad. He went from being a private to being a lieutenant general. I got to West Point. I don't know if any of you've had any experience with the military academies, but candidly, back in 1973, it was a pretty difficult place. As soon as I got there, people started yelling at me for no apparent reason. They made me run everywhere all the time. They would take me to the mess hall for lunch, breakfast, and dinner, and they wouldn't let me eat because I was too busy getting yelled at. So I realized that I'd probably made a mistake. So 3 weeks into my time at the academy, they finally let me call home. So I called my dad and I said, "Dad, you were right. This place sucks. I want to come home." And there was a pregnant pause on the other end of the phone, and finally he said, "Where are you going to sleep?" Had no place to go, stayed at the academy, graduated from the academy in 1977, decided to serve in the Army for 5 years. And after 5 years, I was going to get out and do something else, and that was 35 years ago. And the reason I share with you that story is because you're experiencing the same thing. What I found in my time in the Army is it went from being a job to being a profession to being a passion. And candidly, as I deal with the IHG leadership, and those folks on the installations, part of the Army lodging, part of the privatized Army lodging, I'm dealing with people of passion. So congratulations on that, because that's so, so very important. We as an Army, we as a nation are going through some extremely difficult times. We've been at war for a decade, and we, the senior leaders, the U.S. military, believe that we'll be at war for another decade. We're fighting the global war on terrorism. We're fighting them in places like in Iraq and Afghanistan, so we don't have to fight them in places like Hamilton, Ohio, or Las Vegas, Nevada, or San Antonio, Texas. And that's going to take a while. It's going to take a while. So that's why I need to explain to you the impact of what you're doing in terms of touching lives and making a difference. Our Army won't break because of the stress and strain on our soldiers. Most of you have no idea about the military, but what you see on my uniform is lots of things. The thing I'm most proud of is this patch here, because it's a reflection of the division I had the opportunity to command in combat, the 3rd Infantry Division, the Marne Division. And when President Bush announced the surge, he was talking about the 3rd Division. I had a chance to take 25,000 soldiers into combat in the worst place in Iraq. And for 6 months, we had continuous combat operations. And 6,000 bad people either died or were captured by the soldiers that I commanded in this butt-ugly place called Arab Jabor, Iraq. Unfortunately, 153 soldiers died during those operations on a place on the battlefield that I placed them. And I got to live with that the rest of my life. I start every day in prayer, and on my desk next to my Bible are 153 laminated cards, and it's the faces of the fallen. It's the soldiers, 80% of which are under the age of 25, the soldiers who paid the ultimate sacrifice to guarantee our freedoms. In addition to that, during that period of time, 800 of my soldiers were severely wounded. They lost legs, they lost arms, they lost eyesight, they had post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's happened across our Army. Candidly, even during the middle of that combat operations, the soldiers of the 3rd Division re-enlisted in droves. They wanted to stay in the Army even though in those difficult times. And 3 months into the fiscal year, we'd accomplished our re-enlistment objectives. So just think about that. Major combat operation, major casualties, and at the same time, these soldiers re-enlisting in droves. When I went to Command 3 Corps in Fort Hood, the same thing was happening for the other divisions as well. So rest assured that our Army is not going to break because of the strain of our soldiers, but be concerned about the strain on our families and that's where you come in. Sarah and I have been married for 30 years. We have 2 adult children, but I've been away from Sarah 4 of the last 7 years because the generals aren't immune to the deployment. When I was a Corps commander, a young captain came in with tears in his eyes. He says, "General, I need help." I said, "What can I do for you, young man?" He said, "I've been in the Army 5 years, and I've been married those 5 years. And in those 5 years, I deployed 3 times, twice to Afghanistan and once to Iraq. During those 5 years, my son was born. My son is 4 years old, and my son calls me by my first name because he doesn't know me as his father." That story can be told hundreds of thousands of times across our Army as a result of being at war for the last 10 years. We are under unbelievable stress. You see in the news the suicide rates for our soldiers. Domestic violence is in a marked increase. Child abuse is in a marked increase. Reliance on drugs and alcohol is in a marked increase as a result of 10 years at war. This is where you come in because the great work that you do in IHG with these wonderful hotels manned by wonderful people help alleviate the stress and strain on the families, touching lives, making a difference. My favorite book is a book entitled A Life God Rewards, written by Bruce Wilkinson. And in the book, the author says, God really doesn't care how many stars you wear or how much money you make. God cares about the number of people that you touch. And you within IHG are touching people worldwide. Under the privatized Army lodging program, on the 21 installations that currently have privatized lodgings, you're touching soldiers and their families during difficult times. Normally they're staying in your establishments during periods of transition, where they're moving from one place to the next, or they're coming back from a deployment, or they're fixing to go on a deployment. It's hard for me to see the audience's faces with these lights, but when I say words like fixing to, do you know what I'm talking about? I always got to ask that question. I was indeed at one point in my career the chief of staff of the Kosovo force in Kosovo. And oh, by the way, we still have soldiers there. It was a 600-man staff from 29 different nations. And I was the senior officer. And I had 7 general officers working for me, but I was the only American. And I went there right from Fort Hood, Texas, as a brigadier general. After about 3 weeks with the staff, the French general came up to me and said, "General, we have a problem." I said, "What's the problem?" They say, "Well, in order to be assigned to this NATO headquarters, we are all required to speak English." And we all speak English, but we have no idea what you're saying because you're using words like fixing to. Anyway, I'm glad you understand it. And if you don't understand it, ask the person next to you and they'll explain it to you. The people that are staying in your establishments on military lodging, on base, or around the world are soldiers who are returning from a deployment, fixing to go on another deployment, or in some period of transition. And if you create an environment where you can relieve their stress and strain, give them an enjoyable environment. I'm not just talking about the room. It's not about the room, even though the room is important. It's about the atmosphere. It's about the amenities. It's about the people. That's what it's about. And if you can create an environment for our military families where they can, for a period of time, forget about their trials and tribulations, for a period of time, forget about the bad things in life and concentrate on the good things, you are touching lives and making a difference. I believe it's all about strategic campaign plans. I believe it's about strategic visioning. In IHG, you have magnificent leaders with a strategic vision. And that allows you to focus on doing the right things and doing things right. I want to talk about 3 aspects of your strategic vision as IHG and how we in the U.S. Army approach those same things. And maybe that'd be useful for you to hear how we're doing business, and you can apply it back to where you're going back to continue to touch lives and make a difference. Oh, by the way, I'm kind of busy. There's a million things that I ought to be doing right now that I'm not doing. Installation Management Command is 120,000 people worldwide. It's 163 installations. I have a headquarters in San Antonio. I've got an office in the Pentagon. And there's a million reasons for me not to be here. Candidly, all my staff said, General, you don't have the time to travel to Las Vegas to make this presentation. And I said, au contraire. It's the most important use of my time because I'm going to be talking to people that are touching lives. Three areas that I'd like to talk about and relay to you our experiences in the U.S. military. Branding, the people, and driving profitable revenue. And I know that's a theme throughout the course of your conference. The Army does indeed have 163 installations. My job as the MCOM commander is to drive my organization to an established purpose. And that purpose is to provide our soldiers, our civilians, and their families with a quality of life that's commensurate with their quality of service. Remember, they've been fighting and winning our nation's wars for 10 years. They will do that at least for 10 more years. They deserve that quality of life. So my job is to ensure that regardless of where they are on those 163 installations, that they have a reasonable expectation of established standards of service. Consistency, standardization across those 163 installations. And it really is all about branding. We established early in my tenure a brand for MCOM, so that people, when they saw that brand, they breathed a sigh of relief because they knew that we in MCOM were going to focus on giving them that quality of life that they so richly deserve. You all within IHG are doing the same exact thing. When soldiers and their families move from point A to point B, if they see an IHG hotel, they know that they're going to be well taken care of. They know that the amenities are going to be there. They know that the facility is going to be nice. They know. And I'll just share a personal example. After 35 years in the United States Army, my wife and I, in 3 weeks, retired from the U.S. military and transitioned to another form of service. And oh, by the way, we both have a facial affliction because we can't stop smiling. Because we're looking forward to serving in some other capacity. But if you've been married for 3 decades like we have, and you have adult children like we do, you can appreciate what I'm fixing to tell you is over 30 years you gather lots of stuff. You do. And the Army will move some of that stuff, not all of that stuff, so you have to move the rest yourself. So we're in the process of moving from Virginia back to Central Texas, where our retirement home will be. Most of that move has been on the back of my beautiful wife, because guys like me, we're off doing something else. We say, honey, complete this move. Tell us how it went. And she always does tell me how it went, by the way. But she has to be driving. I bet she's taking 10 or 12 trips between Fort Myer, Virginia and Central Texas, bringing stuff back and forth, back and forth. And she'll call me because she can't do that 25 hours in one continuous movement. She has to stop somewhere and stay somewhere. And she always searches out an IHG hotel. When she calls me and she says, hey, honey, I'm in wherever it might be, Knoxville, Tennessee, and I'm staying at a Holiday Inn Express, for example, I breathe a sigh of relief because I know she's going to be well taken care of. She's going to be secure. She's going to be well taken care of. That's all about branding. And you have to make sure you maintain that consistency because that's what people, not just soldiers and their families, that's what people expect, and you all do that very well. The second thing, and that's people. And it really is all about the people. You can invest $1 gazillion in whatever you want to mess with, but if you don't have the right people there, it's going to be a disaster. It's a disaster. And I hope you do as well in your respective organizations and hotels. I hope that you have a detailed leader development program. I have this belief, unshakable belief, that people generally want to do well. I have yet to find a person who comes to work that day and says, you know, my plan today is just to screw up. I'm going to screw up today. I'm going to screw up for about 8 hours, and I'm going to go home, and I'm going to come in tomorrow and do the same thing tomorrow. I don't believe those people are out there. They may be. I haven't encountered them. But it's all about the people. Part of my leader development program that we do every month across Installation Management Command for the senior leaders requires us all to read a book a month and then talk about that book during our development program. A book that we read, hopefully you've read and had your people read, is a book entitled Good to Great by Jim Collins. Good to Great by Jim Collins. And he says in general terms, it's really not the direction the bus is headed. It really is, do you have the right people on the bus, and they're in the right seat on the bus, and then it's all going to be okay. It's really all about the people. Let me give you 4 aspects of what we deal with that I recommend for your consideration. The first one, you have to make sure you got the right person on the bus. Candidly, I see in my business and maybe in your business that we found ourselves in a situation where we hired the available person, maybe not the right person. And that's just wrong. You have to make sure you've hired the right person. Take the time and a deliberate process to hire the right person. And then you got to train that person. Everybody needs to be developed. I've been doing this for 35 years. I've commanded at all levels from captain to corps. But candidly, there's a lot of learning I still need to do. In my business now, it really is running a large corporation. It's 120,000 people. It's a $12.5 billion enterprise. So I reach out to folks to train me. We call them mentors. I hope you all have a mentor program. A mentor is really defined as somebody who is accessible, who listens, and who truly cares. My mentor is a guy named Reg Brack, who's the chairman emeritus of Time Incorporated. And he comes to see me in the Pentagon or in my headquarters in San Antonio and gives me advice and counsel on how to proceed. And I hope you have the same thing. I hope you have a mentor program. Because if you put the right person on the bus and you put them on the right place on the bus and you've got a detailed leader and workforce development program to improve their performance, by golly, you will succeed. And I give classes all the time. One of it is thoughts on command. It doesn't matter if it's a military command or running your respective hotels, but there are really 4 aspects to being successful. The first one is surround yourself by competent subordinates and delegate. Surround yourself by competent subordinates and delegate. Not all of your subordinates are going to be as competent as you'd like it, so you got to spend time training them. And a critical aspect of the training program is counseling. It's amazing to me in my outfit, and probably in your outfit, the number of youngsters, when you get to be 56 years old, most of them are youngsters, the youngsters who aren't being counseled on a routine basis. You got to sit your workforce down and say, okay, over the last 30 days, here's what I've observed. These are your strengths. These are our areas for improvement, not weaknesses, but our areas for improvement. And these are our objectives for the next 30 days. And then your subordinates will become more competent, and then you can delegate. You know where senior managers fail? And oh, by the way, senior leaders in the Army fail? That's when they try to do everything themselves, because they didn't develop competent subordinates and they cannot delegate. The second thing when I talk about how to be successful is to look down, not up. Look down, not up. Your workforce wants to make sure that you have their best interest in mind, that you're focused on them. You know, we say in the Army, that if you truly take care of the soldiers and their families, they will take care of you. And it's the same thing in your business. But you got to look down, not up. I see managers all the time so worried about where their bosses is, or when's the next inspection, or what are we going to do now? That's not necessary. I demand that all my folks ask 3 questions. The first question is, are we doing the right things? The second question is, are we doing things right? Those are 2 separate questions. Are we doing the right things? Are we doing things right? And if the answer is yes, drive on. If the answer is no, stop. Make appropriate modifications. And the third question is, what are we missing? So what I recommend to leaders at all levels of all types is that you look down, not up. Be an engaged leader. You've got to know your subordinates. You got to know your workforce. You got to love them. I've referred to my soldiers my entire career as my children, because you should love your subordinates like you love your own children. You got to be an engaged leader. You got to ask intrusive questions to make sure you know how things are going in their life, not just at work, but also at home. And if you sense a difficulty, then you should be taking appropriate actions, and you can only do that if you look down and not up. We call it engaged leadership, and I'll give you an example of it. When I was a battalion commander many years ago, the battalion was about 500 people. And every week we'd get about 3 new arrivals into the battalion, and I demanded that I was the first person these 3 new arrivals would see. And they would come into my office, and we were the Mustangs. And I'd tell the young private, I'd say, welcome to the Mustangs. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Lynch. I'm your battalion commander, and I'm here to take care of you. Here's what I expect of you, and here's what you can expect of me. And then I'd tell the young private, let's say his name is Johnny. I'd say, Johnny, well, tell me about yourself. And he'd tell me about himself, and I'd say, who do you love the most? Your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, your aunt, your uncle. Who do you love the most? Who's the most important person to you? And they'll tell me. Let's say he says, my mom. I said, okay, well, what is your mom's phone number? Sir, here's my mom's phone number. Then in the presence of Johnny, I would call his mom. And I'd say, ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Lynch. And I'm a battalion commander, and your son has just joined our battalion, and I promise I'm going to take care of Johnny. Ma'am, is there anything I should know about Johnny? And Mom, who loves Johnny like you love Johnny, is going to tell you. He's going to say, Colonel, Johnny's a good kid, but you just got to know in high school, he got in fights all the time. Anger management. Make a note. She might say, you know, Johnny, when he was at basic training, he got a DUI. Make a note. And she might say, Colonel, you just got to know that when Johnny was at basic training, he was such deep, dark depression, he attempted to kill himself. Make a note. That's engaged leadership, and you all can do the same thing. When somebody joins your workforce at your respective hotel or wherever you happen to be, I contend that you ought to embrace them. I contend that you should love them, and I contend you should be engaged in their life, and they will indeed then, as a result of that, be more productive. And oh, by the way, be happier and be safe and all those things that you want to have with your workforce. It's all about engaged leadership. The third thing I tell leaders to be successful is don't spend a lot of time competing with your sister units. And that applies in your business as well. You all have established standards. It's part of the branding operations. You know what the right thing is to do and how to do the right thing. By golly, you should do it. You ought not worry about being the best. Just be the best that you can against established standards. And then it's a healthier environment. What I hope you're getting out of this conference, because we do the same thing, is an opportunity to exchange thoughts and ideas. Here's what's working for us. It might work for you. I haven't had an original idea in 15 years. I haven't. I've made a practice of stealing other people's good ideas, and that's what you should do as well. And the last thing I tell people, I commend for your consideration, if you're going to be an effective leader, you got to have fun. And you got to demonstrate that it's okay to have fun. I worry about it in the Army sometimes, and I see it in some of you all is, by golly, we're going to work, 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 and we're going to play tomorrow. That is fundamentally wrong. Remember, nobody promised you tomorrow. You're only promised today. I see this all the time. People say, we're just not going to have any fun, General, because we're so busy. But don't worry about it. We'll have fun tomorrow. When I took a man on my brigade combat team, the theme in the operations shop was, we'll sleep when we're dead. They had cots in the office, and they stayed there all the time. Folks, there's more to life than just work. I pass out something to all my sport. It's entitled Food for Thought. And generally it says this: even the President of the United States, when some folks might consider to be the most important person in the world, is only the president for 4 or 8 years. But he's always the husband of his wife and the father of his children. That's where he's most important. People say to me, well, you're going to have a problem there, General. I said, what's that? They said, well, you've been a general for 10 years. You know, in 3 weeks, you're not going to be the general anymore. Well, that might have been a problem if my identity was being the general. But my identity has always been Sarah's husband and the father of Susan and Lucas, and that will indeed continue. And I merit that for your consideration in terms of having balance in your life and demonstrating that balance for your workforce by showing them it's okay to work hard and to play hard. Have fun. So those 4 things, to be an effective manager at any level, if you surround yourself by competent subordinates and delegate, if you look down, not up, if you don't compete with your sister organizations, and you have fun, you will indeed be successful, without a doubt. Let's talk more about the people. I mentioned engaged leadership. I mentioned loving the people. What happens if you have a member of your workforce who's not accomplishing what you want him to accomplish or her to accomplish? Detailed counseling, additional training, and if necessary, you got to get them off the bus. Within the Army program, on the 21 installations that we now have privatized Army lodging, and as we work into PAL Group C, there'll be even more. If there's a complaint, and I get, much like your leaders probably, I get 152 on or about emails every day, and many of them happen to be people that want to complain. If there's a complaint about Army lodging, IHG privatized lodging, the complaint always centers around a person. Not the organization, not the facility, a person. And candidly, there are people out there in your business and mine who do come to work in a bad mood and make it a point to share that bad mood with everybody they come in contact with. That's just fundamentally wrong. We're a service business. In the hospitality business, and I'm in the same business you're in. You know, I commanded a division in combat. I commanded the Corps of 63,000 soldiers. But MCOM is a service-oriented business. And it's about the people. So if you've got somebody that routinely is causing points of friction, that is routinely embarrassing your organization, that is routinely failing to provide the level of service you think is necessary, you got to get them off the bus. I see hesitancy of people doing that because that individual probably has a family, needs to feed his family, has kids in school, need to do that, has payments on his car and his house he's got to make. I got that. Well, then he should probably pay more attention to the counseling and training so you don't have to get him off the bus. I offer that for your consideration. For the owners out there, if you want to hire somebody who's a proven professional, somebody who's already established himself as a mature individual, hire a soldier. Hire a soldier when he comes off active duty. It's amazing to me, it really is. As the Assistant Chief of Staff for Installation Management for the Army, I deal with the entire budget for the Army as it deals with installation management and all aspects. And this year, we paid, as an Army, $600 million in unemployment compensation for our soldiers who left active duty and couldn't find a job. $600 million a year in unemployment compensation. That's wrong in all aspects. From our perspective, it's wrong as Americans. Here are these soldiers. You know, and I tell these soldiers all the time, I'm humbled to be in their presence. Just think about this. We've been at war for 10 years. So 90% of our soldiers have come in the U.S. military after we got involved in war. I was the spokesman for the force in Iraq for an entire year. I dealt with the media during difficult times. I did weekly press conferences. I took reporters out on battlefield circulation. But all that would ever play in the news back home was the bad news. I had a senior editor for one of the major newspapers in our nation come see me in Baghdad and sit in my office. And I looked him in the eye. I said, "Sir, I don't understand. I'm taking your reporters out and I'm showing them good things and bad things, and all over plays in your newspaper is bad things. Why is that?" He had the unmitigated gall to look me in the eye and say, "Bad news sells newspapers." That's a national embarrassment. Same with the televised media. I'd take those camera crews out. We'd show them schools. We'd show them governance. We'd show them great things. And all it would show on TV that night was the most recent explosion. And as they tell me, if it bleeds, it leads. What a tragedy. Anyway, 90% of our soldiers have come in the Army since we've been at war. They knew what they were getting into. They were sitting there in their living room and they were watching bad things on TV, and they had a choice. They could have went off and done something else, or they could have went down to the recruiting station and enlisted in the United States Army. And they chose to enlist. That's why we are free as a nation, because we have people like that. These youngsters, have such a level of maturity. It's almost unbelievable. When you fight in places like Iraq, generally what you do is you clear an area of bad people, you put enough soldiers there to hold the area, and then you build the infrastructure around that patrol base. And that's all led by, 21-year-old youngsters, 19-year-old youngsters. They got this sense of maturity, and they got this knowledge base that the majority of the American public doesn't have, because they figured out how to get the infrastructure established, how to get the schools going, how to get the government going. These are 21-year-old kids. But many of them are leaving the Army with no place to go. Now, I acknowledge that we've got 10% of the American public in the unemployment line as it speaks, but I would recommend for your consideration aggressively searching out these young soldiers who are coming out of the United States military, because they got maturity beyond belief. We always visit wounded heroes, and I hope you do as well. If you go to the Washington National Capital Region, go to Walter Reed. If you go to San Antonio, go to Brooke Army Medical Hospital. Any major installation has wounded heroes. Last week I went to Brooke Army Medical Center, and there's this 20-year-old young man who got blown up in an IED explosion in Afghanistan. And now he's generally immobile. He can't move. But he's still got his spirit. He's still got his education. He's still got his experiences. And I believe he'd be a valued member of your workforce. I asked you to think about that as you're hiring folks. You got the retirees that after 20 years of service are moving to another form of service. I'd recommend you think about them as well. The last thing I want to talk about as it comes to your strategic vision is driving profitable revenue. And I got to paint the bigger picture for you from the national perspective. When you watch TV these days, we're focused on the deficit, a $14.3 trillion deficit as a nation, and we're not going to leave that for our kids and their kids. We cannot do that. So the administration and the U.S. Congress is working now to reduce the deficit. A lot of that's going to find its way into the Department of Defense. In general terms, best case, we believe that over the next 10 years, we as an Army and we as a nation, the Department of Defense, are going to lose $480 billion over the next 10 years. And it could be worse. As this super committee works its way towards some conclusion, it could be worse. So what you got to think about during these times is this. If the ends remain the same, and they do, There's an old guy named Clausewitz who wrote a book entitled On War, and he talked about ends, ways, and means. And if the ends remain the same, and they do, our nation's military is going to continue to fight and win our nation's wars. Wherever our nation needs us to go, we're going to go do it. That has to be done unless you all and folks like you want to relegate your freedoms, and I don't think you want to do that. So our ends remain the same. In my business, the end remains the same. Quality of life commensurate with their quality of service. So if indeed the ends remain the same and the means are going to be significantly reduced, what do we have to do? We have to modify our ways. What's a better way of doing business? And that's where I applaud IHG's Army Lodging. That's where I applaud what we've done with privatized Army Lodging. Candidly, the majority of us in this audience are Americans. Americans first, and we have this national deficit, so we got to figure out how we can accomplish the ends with reduced resources. I got an email this morning that I shared with Kirk from one of my garrison commanders, and there are 74 of them out there, and this garrison commander happened to be the garrison commander at White Sands Missile Range. As many of you know, that was POW Group Bravo and transitioned about the 16th of August, so it's been in effect for a while. And all this garrison commander wanted to talk about was how great things have changed in White Sands Missile Range based on privatized Army Lodging. He used the sentence in his email that we finally have a home. We have a home for our families. We have this thing that's a magnificent hotel with the right infrastructure, the right amenities, the right service mentality. It's not lodging, it's a hotel. That's what privatized Army Lodging has done. And you've done it from a national perspective at reduced cost for the U.S. Army. Our TDY budget has been reduced by about 25% because we can get these youngsters and their families in a magnificent lodging at a reduced cost. So as Americans, you should be proud of the difference that you're making in the lives of our soldiers and their families. You should be very proud. The ends remain the same. The means are changing. We got to modify our ways. But I'm going to frustrate you. Where's the group, Kirk, that are the Army Lodging folks? You got them sitting somewhere together? All right. I'm going to frustrate you. I apologize. It ain't good enough. It will never be good enough. Never be good enough. I frustrate my own workforce because I'm never satisfied. These soldiers and their families, they deserve the best. We as a nation, for whatever reason, we got this all upside down. You know, I got this circle of friends now that are athletes and actors and those kinds of people. And candidly, we got this upside down. We do. We pay athletes way too much. We pay actors, I'm sorry, Susan, my daughter's an actress. We pay actors way too much. She doesn't get paid too much. Just ask me because I'm paying the bills. We pay actors way too much. That's all wrong. The people in our society, I believe, that are the most important people in our society are our soldiers and service members who protect our freedoms and our way of life, and our educators who guarantee our future, and that's the group that we pay the least. Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So these youngsters, they don't have a lot of money, but they deserve the very best, so it's never going to be good enough. You got to look very closely at what you're doing at the lodging on our military installations and continually work to improve. What I love about you all is the fact that you reinvest in the infrastructure. I mean, I understand how to run large installations. And it's all about new construction, and it's about sustainment, restoration, modernization of the old construction, and you all are doing that magnificently well. In some places you say, no, this ain't going to work. By God, we need a new place. In other places you say, no, we can renovate this older place and make it more than acceptable. And then what you do with the social time and what you do with other amenities is magnificent, but I ain't satisfied. It ain't good enough. You got to work to make it better. And as we work our way into POW Group C, we got to contend. We got to commit to, by God, making it better because our soldiers and their families deserve the very best. to preserve the very best. And Kirk, I just realized I don't like your camera crew at all, because I thought I had more hair than that. I really did. I didn't understand why the lady came to me and said, now, General, we have a makeup artist here, and they can put some stuff on here to do away with the glare. But I said, no, I don't need makeup. Maybe I should have reconsidered, you know. In about 3 weeks, much to my wife's chagrin, the hair that still grows on the back of my head is going to migrate into a ponytail, because I think I'd look good with a ponytail. I really do. She told me last night she wasn't going to let that happen, so it's probably not going to happen, but I wish it would. I got 54 seconds left, so I want to tell you something I think is extremely important. Every Sunday, my entire adult life, I called my parents, from the time I was a cadet at West Point to this day. 3 years ago, my mom passed away, and on Sundays when I call, there's still this void in my heart. But I'm a man of faith. I believe Mom's right here. I believe she's sitting right there and critiquing me on this presentation like she always does. Unfortunately, my dad doesn't have the same faith. So every time I go to Hamilton, Ohio, my dad says, let's go visit your mom, because he believes Mom's in that cemetery. I don't believe that's true. But to be the good son, I take my father to the cemetery. And every time I go to the cemetery, I get to thinking. If you look at the tombstones, to include on my mom's tombstone, you got a start date and you got an end date. And in between that start date and end date is a dash. The question you got to ask yourself is, how are you living your dash? When it's all said and done, what are people going to say about you? And candidly, they're not going to be impressed with how much money you made or your stature in life once you do pass on. They're going to be impressed with the number of people you touched. How much did you give back? How much did you focus on taking care of other people and not so much on taking care of yourself? How do you live your dash? I do ask you to think about, when's the last time you told those that you love that you truly love them? I find myself in situations where people tell me, well, I am indeed in love, and I'll tell my dad tomorrow that I love him, and there's no guarantees for tomorrow. I would ask that you commit yourself, for those that you love, to tell them that you love them, to commit yourself to righting whatever wrongs there might be. I gave a presentation to a large audience like this one time, and I said, if you're indeed neglecting those that you love, I believe you should correct that. There was a mother and her 32-year-old daughter in the audience. They both worked for me. They committed that day to spend more time focused on each other, to tell each other that they love each other, to work through whatever tribulations they might have. After 1 week, the 32-year-old daughter died. And that mother still contacts me routinely to tell me thank you for that time that she had with her daughter. So I offer that up to you. How are you living your dash? Are you demonstrating engaged leadership with your subordinate and talking to them about living their dash? And are you making a difference? So I'll end this like I started. You ain't fishing. You're touching lives, and you're making a difference. And I'm proud to be serving with you. God bless you all. Thank you very much.
So much for the wonderful job.